Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arias emphasized that any agreement to be adopted with Guyana on the disputed Essequibo territory must be based on the 1966 Geneva Agreement. The International Labour Organization has warned that the global employment crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic is deepening. The African continent has surpassed the 400,000 mark in terms of COVID-19 cases and registered 10,000 fatalities. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Venezuela, where Foreign Minister Jorge Arias emphasized this Wednesday that any agreement to be adopted with Guyana on the disputed Essequibo territory must be based on the 1966 Geneva Agreement and satisfy both nations. Arias recalled that Article 33 of the United Nations Charter clearly establishes the means to settle and find common ground regarding Venezuela's claim over the territory. He explained that the aforementioned article also indicates the means to peaceful solution, conciliation, negotiation, investigation and judicial settlement of disputes. The Foreign Minister stressed that the authorities of Guyana have decided to ignore the Geneva Agreement, which is the only accord recognized by the Venezuelan government, and expressed his confidence in international organizations and international law. And Venezuela's National Electoral Council approved the rules for the upcoming parliamentary elections in December.
The National Electoral Council on the permanent session has unanimously approved the special norms for the parliamentary election for the 2021-2026 period. In this way, we are assuming our responsibility of guarantee the Venezuelan people their self-determination through vote of their political rights to show a vision. As such, we reiterate our commitment to the elections under the principles of equality, transparency, impartiality and efficiency.
Further revelations have been made regarding the electoral fraud that benefited current Colombian President Iván Duque. According to the latest revelations, the fraud financed in the Guajira region of Colombia by the late drug trafficker Cesar Jorge Hernández Aponte, also known as El Ñeñe, extended to the Department of Santander during the second round of the presidential elections in which Iván Duque won. A recording of a conversation between Ñeñe and businesswoman Sandra Isabel Aguilar demonstrates that the fraud was coordinated together with trafficker Fernando de Matos. Fernando has been imprisoned in Venezuela since 2015. The recordings, originally requested by the Office of the Attorney General of Colombia for a murder case involving Ñeñe, were hidden by the same office for 21 months. As soon as the recordings were released, the Attorney General's office, under a new prosecutor, arrested the police officers responsible for concealing the evidence. The Brazilian Health Ministry reported almost 38,000 new coronavirus cases and over 1,000 deaths on Tuesday. Brazil has now reported over 1.4 million cases and the death toll stands at over 59,000. The state of Sao Paulo, the country's most populous, has been the hardest hit by the virus, followed by Rio de Janeiro. Meanwhile, it was also noted that more than 790,000 patients across the country have successfully recovered from the virus. Brazil continues to report the second highest number of cases and the second highest death toll in the world after the United States. Former Bolivian President Evo Morales announced on Tuesday that the imminent electoral defeat of the de facto regime is leading the current government to undertake legal processes against the movement towards Socialism Party. Morales highlighted that the de facto regime of Denis Añez initiated a lawsuit against mass presidential candidate Luis Arce in a bid to push him out of the race. Likewise, journalist Ernesto Reyes wrote an article in which he exposes the absence of constitutional guarantees for supporters of the ousted former president. Reyes also pointed to the use of the lawfare method against popular leaders in reference to the criminal complaint filed on Tuesday before the Public Ministry against Luis Arce for alleged economic damage to the state regarding the mismanagement of workers' social contributions. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador will fly to Washington for a meeting with US President Donald Trump from July 8th to 9th. The president's visit to the United States will be the first since he took office in December 2018.
Yesterday, we received confirmation of an invitation for an official working visit to the United States on July 8th and 9th. The free trade agreement in a new phase is also an important development, especially in the economic and commercial fields.
Cuba reopened its borders to international tourism this Wednesday, while the number of COVID-19 cases continues to fall in the island. The reopening to foreign visitors follows a first phase of de-escalating of measures, which has also meant a return to domestic tourism. However, international tourists will only be able to visit all-inclusive resorts on the Keys of Santa Maria, Cayo Coco, Cayo Guillermo, Cayo Cruz and Cayo Largo, the first to reopen. Cuban authorities have pointed out that each hotel facility will have its own team of doctors to monitor the health of guests. The government of Grenada is continuing to evaluate the protocols that will guide the reopening of the country's borders to commercial flights. Prime Minister Keith Mitchell stated that the protocols are rigorous because public health and safety are at risk. According to the PM, the country has tested and evaluated the protocols and identified areas for improvement. Grenada's full list of protocols is expected to be finalised, approved and made public soon. The increasing number of cases in the United States, which is one of Grenada's main markets for tourists, presents an area of concern for the authorities.
In an amicable manner.
And Grenada's Ministry of Health stated on Wednesday that foreign crew members of the MSC Armonia cruise ship, which arrived in the country this Tuesday, will be repatriated via the Maurice Bishop International Airport. 150 crew members from Peru and El Salvador disembarked from the ship vessel early this Wednesday and under the supervision of health officials. And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The International Labour Organization has warned that the global employment crisis sparked by the COVID-19 pandemic is deepening. According to the ILO, the COVID-19 crisis has taken a much heavier toll on jobs than previously feared, and the situation in the Americas is particularly alarming. A study estimates that by the end of the first semester of 2020, global working hours were down 14% compared to last December, which is equivalent to some 400 million full-time jobs. That is more than double the number predicted by the organisation back in April.
Gradual trajectory in the upwards direction. It is a continuing process, but I think the key thing is the geographic spread. We've seen this pandemic go across the world from its origins in Asia and Pacific and now hitting particularly hard the Americas, where we see the loss of jobs as being the worst in the world. The average across the world is now 14% reduction in work done. In the Americas, that's at 18.3%. And in South America in particular, the highest in the world, we're nearly at 20%. But the bad news is the most pessimistic scenario, which would include a second wave of the pandemic. That would mean that at the end of this year, from the current loss of 400 million jobs, we would still be at 340 million. And the Americas would still be the worst off. At the other end of the scale, the optimistic scenario would point to quite a rapid recovery. The loss of jobs will be down to something like only 34 million. Still a very, very hard hit on the global economy. We've seen that the G20, which played such a vital role in avoiding the worst happening during the financial crisis in 2008-2009, it frankly hasn't been able to play the same role up to this point. So I remain hopeful that because of the obvious and stark need for greater international cooperation, the world in some way will recover its appetite for multilateral cooperation. You know, if there is one crisis that requires a global response, it is this global pandemic.
The United States could see 100,000 new coronavirus cases a day if citizens do not start following public health recommendations, authorities have warned. According to the top US infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci, the rate of COVID-19 cases in the United States could more than double if current outbreaks are not contained. The US is currently recording about 40,000 new cases a day. The director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases declined to predict a figure for the expected death toll related to the pandemic, but stressed it would be disturbing. Fauci also warned of second waves of COVID-19 in several states, while the total number of cases has now surpassed 2.75 million and the death toll tops 130,000.
We can't just focus on those areas that are having the surge. It puts the entire country at risk. We are now having 40,000+ new cases a day. I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around, and so I am very concerned.
A US judge has ruled that the former Atlanta police officer who fatally shot Rayshard Brooks can be freed on bond while his case is pending. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Jane Barrick set a bond of $500,000 for Garrett Rolfe, the officer facing 11 charges, including felony murder. The shooting came in the midst of the ongoing massive protests against police brutality and systemic racism.
Think that he is a danger.
The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in the US city of Seattle, which was established 3 weeks ago by activists in the midst of the widespread protests against police brutality and systemic racism, was cleared by police forces this Wednesday. A large group of police in riot gear began forcing the occupiers of the zone out at 5 a.m. local time. No violence was reported, but at least 13 people were arrested in the downtown Seattle area, according to the local police chief. Video showed police on foot and bicycles and carrying batons, setting up a perimeter around the zone, while others dismantled protesters' tents and street barriers. Tourists have begun arriving on the Greek island of Corfu for the first time in months as the country races to salvage a tourism season hit hard by the novel coronavirus pandemic. Nearly 20 charter flights were expected to land in Corfu on Wednesday. Greece, which has reported a relatively low COVID-19 death toll of under 200 and just over 3,400 cases, has launched a promotional campaign to revive its tourism sector, which accounts for a quarter of its gross domestic product. The country hopes to reassure potential travellers as well as the local population who fear a resurgence of the pandemic with the return of tourists. In Italy, police have seized 14 tons of amphetamines allegedly produced in Syria by the Islamic State group. According to the finance police of Naples, the drugs were intended to be sold on the European market to finance terrorism. They were transported in the form of around 84 million pills hidden inside containers and were worth about €1 billion. According to the Italian police, the Islamic State finances its terrorist activities mainly by trafficking drugs made in Syria and in the past few years has become the world's largest producer of amphetamines. In Poland, the arts-rich Birkin State Museum has reopened after months of closure due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. Prevention measures have been implemented to protect both visitors and museum staff.
First of all, there are fewer visitors allowed on the museum site. The groups are smaller, the route of the visit has changed a little so that the groups do not cross. The visitors are kept at a distance from the guides to respect the safety instruction concerning social distancing. We have other precautionary measures such as a disinfection portal which is located at the entrance of the museum and which provides security for employees and visitors. In some places in the museum there are also hand sanitizers dispensers. Thanks to special support from the Polish Ministry of Culture, the museum's survival is guaranteed, but this hole in our budget means that many projects relating to education, exhibitions or research have been cancelled or postponed.
Russian President Vladimir Putin held a video conference with his Iranian and Turkish counterparts Hassan Rouhani and Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Wednesday in order to discuss the situation in Syria.
A project of joint declaration is prepared for our meeting that presents an agreed approach of our three countries to further step on Syrian direction. In particular, we need to cooperate in order to finally liquidate terrorist groups, to promote political process led by the Syrians themselves with the UN coordinating role. The Russian side supports this document that shows the determination of Russia, Iran and Turkey as guarantors of the Astana process to pursue a consistent joint work to achieve a really strong peace and stability in Syria.
The Communist Party of China is celebrating 99 years of existence, with almost 92 million members from all walks of life. In this new anniversary, the party shows an increase of 2.34 million new members, while it has raised its grassroots organisations to 4.68 million. A report prepared for the day emphasised the sustained growth within the ranks of this political force since its creation, as well as the integration of youth, workers, farmers, professionals, women and ethnic group representatives. Since its 19th Congress, the CCP amended its statutes to include new concepts of governance, thought and strategies that seek to make it a stronger organisation and move towards the desired socio-economic and political revitalisation of the country. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The African continent has surpassed the 400,000 mark in terms of COVID-19 cases and registered 10,000 fatalities. According to Johns Hopkins University, South Africa remains the most affected country, with over 150,000 cases identified from over 1.6 million tests conducted, followed by Egypt, Nigeria, Ghana and Algeria. The highest COVID-19 death toll on the continent has been reported in Egypt, with nearly 3,000 fatalities. Africa's figures continue to be very low compared to other continents like Europe and the Americas, which alone account for over 50% of cases. A group of protesters gathered on Wednesday outside the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg to protest against Africa's first COVID-19 vaccine trial. The protesters burned face masks and carried banners against the trials. The trial that began last week in Johannesburg is part of one already underway in the United Kingdom of a vaccine developed at the University of Oxford. Some 2,000 volunteers in South Africa are expected to take part, but the small band of demonstrators who gathered Wednesday at the university where the trial is based reflect long-running fears among some in Africa over the testing of drugs on people who don't understand the risks.
It goes against all protocols. And even if people are going to consent, there has to be informed consent. It's a form of a violation of a person's body. It's a form of rape. It's not acceptable. So vaccines, period, whether it's in China or Italy, is not acceptable. But however, logic should tell me if you want to test it in the areas which they call the epicenters of the world, not the epicenters of South Africa. That's my concern.
In Thailand, schools reopened this Wednesday with strict hygiene rules to protect both teachers and students from possible COVID-19 infection. As students arrived, they were warned to closely follow the new rules, which included the use of face masks and social distancing. Ahead of Wednesday's nationwide resumption of classes, authorities recommended that class sizes be restricted to 20 to 25 students, while doorknobs, desks and other areas at risk of spreading infection must be cleaned frequently throughout the day.
I'm nervous because I haven't met anyone for a long time and the atmosphere of the classroom and internet learning are different, so I'm curious if there will be anything new.
Ever since the children came back, it's a new thing, whether it's from a student or a teacher perspective. We have to prioritize the protection measures for the spreading of germs.
Palestinians took to the streets of Gaza City to protest against Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had set July 1st as the date from which the Israeli regime would begin the annexation of occupied Palestinian territory as part of US President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. Several thousand protesters brandished Palestinian flags and placards condemning Trump at a rally in Gaza City, while demonstrations also took place in the West Bank cities of Ramallah and Jericho. Hamas, which rules in the Gaza Strip, has stated that Israeli annexation of the West Bank would be a declaration of war.
The resistance must take action as of now, because Israel will not recognize anything called compromise or negotiation. Israel will only feel power, and we must unite to resist Israel. It is a mention of defiance and anger that is directed at this Zionist occupation for the decision of annexation and theft of our lands. We want to say to this occupier that this volcano will explode on this Zionist entity, and that they bear all the repercussions of this folly and this new crime. All options are open to confront the decisions of annexation and stealing of lands and toppling the deal of the century. The occupation must bear all the consequences of that.
Egypt reopened the famous Giza pyramids in Cairo and the Egyptian Museum on Wednesday for the first time in more than 3 months. The Giza pyramids received visitors who underwent temperature checks before starting their tour. According to Ashraf Mohi-al-Din, the director of the Giza complex, the period of closure was used to carry out restoration and maintenance at the historical site. The Egyptian government wants to revive the tourism sector, which had showed signs of recovery before the pandemic after years of instability. Egypt's economy depends heavily on tourism, which accounts for some 12% of gross domestic product.
We are celebrating today the reopening of the Pyramids Monuments area for tourists again. We took advantage of the period of closure to work on maintaining and restoring the monuments, pyramids and tombs from inside to prepare them for visits again. After the coronavirus, we are also taking precautionary measures to maintain visitors' safety in the site.
Now we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
From here to beyond the South,